Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Jesse Simonton. Jesse writes for the Surrender Cobra newsletter on Substack. It is free. You should subscribe. A lot of great storylines that you're going to be able to dig through the rest of the season as well. You've been very, very busy the first part of the season. We love promoting free college football content as we do at Saturday Down South as well. Jesse, we're talking midseason storylines today. So let's start with a meta question for you. Who is the most Surrender Cobra team in college football right now? Because all the talk about these firings that have happened so far, at least those fan bases have a feeling of optimism of, well, it's about to get better. We're about to make a big name hire. And you're in kind of this interesting little phase. In my opinion, your newsletter should be this specific program's face on it, because I think there's an obvious candidate, obvious school right now that fits the Surrender Cobra mantra better than anybody in the sport.
Wow, you're putting me on the spot here. I love the layup. I appreciate the promotion. It's a good cross promotion. See, I'm kind of thinking as I'm permeating the thoughts in my mind in real time. I'm kind of imagining the Surrender Cobra with the Spider-Man meme where three teams are pointing at each other at once. Because I think you could make a pretty damn good case that Florida State, and Auburn can all be the Surrender Cobra teams. As we sit here at the midpoint season. Was that one of your three teams?
So it wasn't, but
wow.
there's a case, but I like where you're going with that. I like where you're going with that because I think you can't have made a firing yet. If you've already made the firing, you're not necessarily in this defeated state. Like you're waiting for your athletic director to pull the trigger. And the whole point, in my opinion, is like feeling like, oh my God, this is just a state of exasperated just apathy. And I think Wisconsin is the team.
See, to me, it's almost like you poked a badger and you poke it with a stick and you already realize it's dead. I'm not even sure that there's not enough fans in Camp Randall right now to actually be Surrender Cobra-ing. Whereas Florida, think about this. This is why I'll make the case for Florida first, because I think you could make a strong case for Auburn and Florida State as well. But Florida, particularly because of kind of the rumors that have been running around with, Napier, when, not if, so to speak, that his job is going to be on the line. Think about this 2 weeks ago. Florida fans could barely even enjoy beating Texas. It's kind of the ethos of Surrender Cobra. They could barely even enjoy beating Texas because they're like, oh my God, are we going to have to keep this guy now? We don't want to keep this guy. And then 2 weeks later, you lose to A&M where he goes for it. He completely ignores analytics and goes for it on 4th and 6 instead of punting the ball. I joked on a piece that came out Sunday. What was your favorite, third and long draw call that Billy called? Because he called it 3 times, and 2 of them went for just completely negative yardage. So I think Florida right now is probably the Surrender Cobra fan base program. But Scotty certainly has a case. I think that they're just dead. I think that, Florida State, when you see those stats, David Hale of ESPN, he always pulls out some great nuggets. He had one that just was a doozy on Sunday, that 46 teams, I don't know if you saw this, Connor, 46 teams have more ACC wins since September 1st a year ago than Florida State. We're talking about almost half the sport.
Oh my God. That's really depressing when you put it in perspective. Yeah, you're right. Those are all good candidates. The only reason I wanted to hammer home Wisconsin was just hearing the comments that the chancellor made. It's basically like she's not interested in athletics, and hearing about what Barry Alvarez has said about you guys are spoiled, blah, blah, blah. And it's this concept that I've brought to the table a lot. And you're right. Like all these fan bases are kind of in it right now. College football hell is a place that you never want to be in. Of course, you never want to be in any form of hell. But to think that those schools are just circling the wagons, hoping their athletic director realizes it gets that bad to where they can pull the trigger and move on. It's not a good place to be, and all of those teams are very much in it.
The crazy thing about Wisconsin, too, is that they were such a program of stability for so long that then they took the swing to say, hey, we want better. We want to do better. That's what Penn State's doing. Penn State's saying we want different, but we also want better. Scotty did that. They made a hire that I think was pretty universally praised. Most folks thought that Luke Fickell was an excellent head coach. Now, his decision with the offensive coordinator that he paired himself with early on. I don't think him did him any favors. The recruiting there has certainly been lackluster. But now you're talking about purgatory. I mean, they have just fallen down the ladder with as chaotic as I think we think this coaching carousel is going to be this 2025 cycle. That job's going to rank fairly low, even though it's in the Big Ten. And it comes from a program that, historically was going to Rose Bowls and was winning, 9 or 10 games. And man, it's a sad, sad state of affairs. And I think, honestly, we could see, Barry Alvarez be coming back and doing, taking over. I'm not saying he's going to be on the sidelines, obviously, but I think he's going to start really pulling the strings in terms of power play in there. Because I think if and when they fire Fickle, I think McIntosh, the AD, is going to be gone as well.
Yeah, and I got into it this summer talking about the worst contracts in college football and the fact that they just have this meeting with all of their coaches and they basically decide, were you satisfactory or not? And if you were, you get another year added to your contract is the most Mickey Mouse thing I've ever heard. Like, grow up, Wisconsin. And I have so much respect. Like, I've been to plenty of games at Camp Randall and absolutely love that atmosphere when it's rocking. But yeah, they need to be a big boy school at a big boy time in college athletics. So Fickle could be the answer to this question. But I think it's fair to ask, with the way that this season has played out, who is the next coach that will be fired from a power conference job?
Yeah, I mean, Fickle is probably the easiest layup there just because they could get blasted by 50 by Ohio State this weekend. Timeline-wise, though, when you add in the fact that Oregon is the very next weekend and then they have a bye, they could wait and just saddle these two losses with him. If Napier loses to Mississippi State at home on Saturday, he's done. There's no doubt about that. He's done. I don't know if you saw the gobbledygook. I'm sure you did. You're very well read, and you just wrote a column on SDS about. I mean, the gobbledygook coming out of Auburn with what their AD said and that crazy metaphor. Hugh can't be feeling too good. So if he loses to a Missouri team at home again, I wonder if that's another one. So, I mean, I think I joked that the bloodletting has begun, and now it's the dominoes are going to just start falling. So buckle up because we're in for just, I think, a swath of these firings, and then it's how long do you wait, obviously, for a hire.
Yeah, the carousel is going to be nuts. And you just wrote about how this has potential to be shades of what we saw in 2021. What made that carousel so nuts was the big premier jobs that opened up. Would you argue the only way that this cycle ends up maybe one-upping that is if some of those same jobs open up, like a USC, if it all falls apart for Lincoln Riley, which I realize they just got a big-time win against Michigan, or like Oklahoma, if it goes sideways, LSU, of course. Like, it feels like those jobs would have to open up along with Penn State for this cycle to be even crazier than 21.
Well, Florida, so in that 21 cycle, you're absolutely right. In that 21 cycle, Florida was open. So Florida is likely going to be open. Va Tech was open.
Yeah.
Va Tech's open again. Oklahoma, I think, is one that we all need to keep a real eye on. I know that it's crazy because just like Penn State, Sooners were in the top 5. They were feeling much better than Penn State was. Penn State wasn't playing particularly well, even when they were winning. Oklahoma gets these wins. Suddenly, they have a huge missed opportunity, losing that Red River Rock fight. Mateer, he's such kind of like a one-man band. I mean, he has to be just kind of Superman for them. Getting next to nothing from Jaden Ott, I think, has really hurt that offense. And so is he going to be able to withstand what is arguably the hardest remaining schedule the rest of the season? So if Venables, who already has a couple 6-6 seasons, there's a power vacuum in Oklahoma too. Jim Nagy is maybe, depends on who you talk to, maybe Brent Venables' boss right now because there is no AD, so do you keep the general manager and say, hey, we're going to bring back Mateer, we're going to bring back Ben Arbuckle, and then come in and hire a head coach? That would not surprise me if Oklahoma ends up losing, 4 or 5 down the stretch. So when you add that domino, you tossed out LSU. I mean, that one is a huge wild card. Look, I think another job that was open that cycle, Connor, Notre Dame. Yeah. I don't think Notre Dame's going to be open, but there's a reason Marcus Freeman's name keeps popping up for whether it's Florida, whether it's Penn State. That there's some back channeling going on with a lot of these teams. So I don't know if it'll be quite as wild or star-studded, I should say, as 2021. But I do think the domino effect this cycle is going to impact even more programs. And the reason for that, frankly, is, and this is what I kind of wrote about, in this new modern age, because of your alma mater, Indiana, folks are really thinking, and I mean like the power brokers, the ADs, the boosters, the people that are, funding these hires and fires. They're looking at it now and saying, why can't we, add water instant success? If Kurt Cignetti can do it at literally the worst power conference football program in history, why can't we? Now, obviously, in a vacuum, Kurt Cignetti is clearly a top 5 coach. He's, there's a gamble there. But the macro point is that no longer are the days are, for the most part, are blue blood programs, the Georgias, the Clemsons, these schools going to hand their keys to a former hotshot coordinator. The Dabo Sweeney's wasn't a coordinator, but he was never a head coach, wide receivers coach. Kirby Smart, never been a head coach. They're not going to be patient enough to do that. So what does that mean? It's all these different, suddenly it's like the game, when you're at the ballpark and it's like the 3 hats and everybody's moving around. Where's the ball? It's everybody's going to be poaching a head coach from somebody else. So if Matt Rule leaves Nebraska is going to go, hire a sitting head coach, and somebody else is going to go hire a sitting head coach. So maybe the South Floridas of the world will go for a coordinator or whatever. But if you're in a power conference school right now that's looking at a head coach, I would be stunned if they ended up hiring a coordinator.
And the interesting thing is Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning,
exactly,
coordinators. They're coordinators, and there could be a couple of those schools that swerve in this cycle and just say, you know what, if I think I can get the next Dan Lanning, I'm going to go get him. Now, the question is, of course, who is that? Well, we can get into that in some of the rising coordinators who may be, ticketed for bigger and better jobs very, very soon. But you're right. You talk to, like, when you throw out some of these coordinators for these jobs, the fan reaction is just, we want a proven head coach. And I get it. I totally get it. But also, if you had told anyone, this is what Dan Lanning's going to become, this is what Kirby Smart's going to become, those are the top 0, 0.0001%, whatever. But there is something to be said for that. I'd be fascinated to know who is willing to take a chance like that, because it seems like you're exactly right. I think athletic directors are trending in the other direction.
I mean, it's especially, and then you add in the fact that like a guy like John Sumrall is probably going to be ready to level up this cycle. And so he is now at the front of the line instead of a Glenn Schumann at Georgia. It's
right.
Funny. Georgia fans want to get rid of Glenn Schumann now. Now it looks like, I'm tongue in cheek there, but it's just, the defense, the way they've performed in the first half of some of these games. He's a guy that's been linked to a ton of jobs in the last several years, SEC jobs, ACC jobs, the likes. I'd be skeptical if he gets a Power 4 job this cycle. Buster Falk, at Georgia Tech, awesome offensive coordinator. I think a lot of schools could do way worse than Buster Falk. I joked in the preseason, one of my bold predictions was that he's going to become the next head coach at Va Tech. I don't think Va Tech's going to go that route. I think Va Tech feels like they need, again, stability, and they want someone that can come in and win now. And so these programs, I just don't think these ADs, they just don't want to be patient enough to kind of wait on the training wheels. You mentioned a couple great ones right there, Lanning, and obviously Kirby being at the top of the sport. They maybe are the outliers, I think, in kind of this modern era now where ADs are going to, look and link.
A lot of talk about the coaches that are in trouble. Should also talk about the coaches that have done a whale of a job so far this season. The National Coach of the Year awards are basically impossible to repeat in. Like, I looked back at the major ones, AP, Eddie Robinson, Home Depot, AFCA. Nobody has ever gone back-to-back, ever, in the history of those awards. I think Kurt Cignetti is about to become the first coach to ever do that if IU makes it back to the playoff. Any pushback whatsoever on that?
Zero. I didn't know that's a good nugget. I know that, like, Saban only won it, like, once or twice, which is kind of crazy, One
you can win it multiple times, but you're basically just like ruled out if you won it the year before. It's like impossible it takes this exact situation to repeat.
It would be, I mean, I guess, Ryan Day, with kind of, Ryan Day would be the only one that I would say would rival Kurt thus far for that job. And what Cignetti has done is truly remarkable. They just play with such flawless execution. Obviously, they've infused that talent there with the offensive and defensive lines, the transfers they brought in. Day does deserve credit, I think, for the fact that, they lost so many stars on defense, and then he makes 2 coordinator hires that seem to be working out just fine. Whether he's still calling the plays or Hartline is, I don't know. But, Matt Patricia, I think, has been a real surprise to a lot of folks, myself included, who, thought that losing Jim Knowles was going to be kind of a big blow. And now, I had a piece on Sunday that obviously I think the competition right now is more watered down offensively than it was in 2021, but their stats, Ohio State's defensive stats, are kind of rivaling Georgia's, which was, an all-time historic unit. So Day would probably be 1B, but I think it's got to go to Kurt.
Yeah, Clark Lee at Vandy, if Vandy makes a playoff or something like that, like Joey McGuire at Texas Tech, Brent Key at Georgia Tech, Mike Elko at A&M, Lane at Ole Miss, and then Kalen DeBoer at Bama post week 1. I know that's not going to be a popular opinion, but like if they go 12-1, and if they win the SEC after just such a disastrous start, like I think he would be worthy of that type of consideration. But it could end up just being Cignetti or the field. I mean, like that's
Joey McGuire would just give it to Cody Campbell.
Right?
He would just write it off to Cody Campbell.
Cody Campbell comes out with a commercial basically accepting the award on Joey McGuire's behalf.
Exactly.
You talk about the Broyles Award. I think midseason, if I had a vote, it's going to Matt Patricia. Like I would hand it to him today, and I would have no problem with that, with all the turnover. I realize you have arguably the best defensive player in college football to work around, which is nice, but still so much turnover in that unit. I'd also consider Blake Baker, Buster Faulkner as well. Mike Shanahan in Indiana is another one. Who else has impressed you besides those guys, like to this point?
I think Dawson at Miami.
Yeah.
I think that, what he's gotten out of, there was a lot of consternation in the preseason about who are the Hurricanes going to be throwing the ball to? Who are the playmakers there? They seem like they got some damn good playmakers, that freshman being at the forefront. But he's also gotten, he has clearly connected well with Carson Beck. Beck looks like, I never really bought into Beck being kind of the number 1 overall pick, but he looks like an NFL quarterback. He looks like an NFL quarterback again. So I think Dawson, I mentioned Buster Faulkner. I think what he's done has been impressive. And this sounds weird because they lost, obviously, this past weekend. But before that, I think Will Stein is another guy that is at least going to be on the radar, in terms of not only for the Broyles, but as a guy who I think, could get some G6 head coaching consideration because of his kind of offensive prowess.
And I talked about this with Matt Hayes. Like, if you're not looking at Will Stein for one of your openings, man, like I think you're doing it wrong. Like I think that guy deserves a seat at the table, especially after seeing the way that the Kenny Dillingham path that he was able to follow from that role as Oregon's OC. I think the midseason Heisman is always worth talking about, but take it for what it is, obviously, because just nobody has ever looked at a game that's happened in the first half of the year and said, okay, that's the guy's got the award and it's just everybody else's. So let's take this for what it is. My Heisman ballot at this point would be like Ty Simpson, Ruben Bain, Fernando Mendoza, and then with Ahmad Hardy consideration. And then Jeremiah Smith, just kind of lurking. He doesn't have the numbers just yet. He's not even top 10 in receiving. I don't think he's top 20 right now, but it has to be part of that conversation. Where would you lean right now if you were picking the midseason Heisman?
That's a good list. I'm gonna throw you out one more wild card name, but I think it has to. I will say before I do that, it's got to start with Ty. I just believe that the laser show that he's putting on with these 3rd and 4th down throws is just remarkable. It's even the worst Heisman voters can look at a stat line and say 16 touchdowns to 1 interception is merits legitimacy and consideration, and the fact that he has that Alabama A crest on his helmet is going to help. And if the Tide keep winning, I think Ty the Theismann is probably coming, I would say. My wild card candidate, though, I like the guys you mentioned. I think Ruben Bain deserves a spot if Miami continues to play with such ferocity on defense, the rest of the season. I really like Jade Maeva at USC. He would be my wild card. They got to win, obviously. And so I think he has to win on Saturday for this to even hold water for another, 4 days, 3 days. So this could be, blow up quite quickly. But if he beats Notre Dame on the road and USC then, can continue to stack up some wins, I think he leads the nation in yards per attempt. He's up there with touchdowns too. So, the Lincoln Riley quarterback is always a semi-safe bet. And he's kind of, quietly put together a really nice season to start. So needs a big finish. But I like Maeva, up there too. Mendoza, you're absolutely right. If Indiana keeps winning and he continues to put up some nice numbers, that's almost just like that a program representative there for the Heisman.
I should have included Haynes King, by the way. Now that I'm saying that out loud.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. All the quarterbacks at the top, it feels like transfers with the exception of Ty Simpson. Like Ty Simpson's just a rare breed. And, all these other guys across the sport, man, it's kind of wild to think about like where Fernando Mendoza was last year. Even like, the Dante Moore thing, like that's a guy that had to kind of find the right home. And, it's becoming more and more popular. You look at just the quarterbacks who have made it to New York, and they all seem to have handpicked their places, after figuring out kind of who they are in college football. If you're not willing to recruit a quarterback out of the portal, Dabo Swinney, it looks like you're hurting yourself. I think that's been a midseason takeaway.
But that's a great, and the point you're making is outstanding because it also just shows you how chaotic this sport can be. Flashback to literally 2 months ago, and one of the biggest preseason storylines and narratives is that, it's all these teams return these quarterbacks, or it's guys that have waited for the Arch Mannings, Cade Club. You mentioned Cade Klubnik, Garrett Nussmeier, Lenora Sellers. These guys were all atop, these Heisman odds. Drew Aller, all these guys way up on the Heisman odds. And then by and large, I mean, Sellers has certainly had his moments, but by and large, those guys have just all stunk. And it's just, it's pretty crazy.
Speaking of LSU, there are so many teams across college football, mainly in the SEC, who are at this very interesting fork in the road where if you tell me they're going to end up 7-5, I'll believe you. If you tell me they're going to Atlanta, I'll believe you. And LSU is maybe the prime example of that. How in the world does this regular season shake out for the Bayou Bengals?
It's a snow globe, man. I think the SEC is just it's a car wreck every week, it seems like. And your guess is as good as mine. I do not think it's going to end fortuitously. I'll say that. I do not. I see kind of a poor ending. I just think their offense is just so it's just so static right now. It's just dead. It's just we've just seen no improvement. Bye week coming off, whatever. Yes, they gained some yards on this past weekend, but then they turned the ball over a million times. I mean, on the broadcast, Cole Kubiak and these guys were tossing out just some insane stats about, Nussmeier's arm strength or lack thereof, I should say, which was just kind of eye-opening. And so at this point, it doesn't mean they can't or will or cannot improve, but there isn't a lot of evidence thus far. When you can't run the ball, it's just really tough. And then you have a quarterback, whose arm looks shot. If 20 points is your ceiling thus far in every game, it's going to be hard to win a lot of these games when you got Oklahoma, Alabama, and like these big games. Vandy this weekend where they're a 2-point dog. They're going to have to match points with Jade Maeva. So I really like what Blake Baker's done with that defense. But LSU going from 5-1 to, I'll say 8-4, would not surprise me at all.
As someone who picked LSU to win a national championship, I feel sad saying same. Yes, would agree with that.
I picked Alabama. I'll say this. I picked Alabama to win the national championship, and that pick is obviously still alive, but I'm not sure the SEC has a national champion this season. I think they got a lot of ites. Now, maybe they got some really good ites, but Alabama, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Georgia. I think all those teams could make the playoff, and you could say that. And I think maybe they all will make the playoff, but I'm not sure that there's a national champion in that bunch. It really may be an Ohio State, Indiana sort of deal. TBD on Miami. Their schedule they're about to play 7 weeks in a row. That's going to be, with a couple road games to end the season. We'll see if they can handle that. But I could be wrong. But right now, it just seems like the SEC is a lot of really high quality, but I'm not sure the ceiling, is there for some of these programs in 25.
You're right. And I think that has definitely played out in the first part. And it definitely is. Well, you're looking at the two highest ranked teams from the SEC and you're realizing, well, this is an Ole Miss team that hasn't exactly been to an SEC championship, and neither has A&M. So there's this, when's the shoe going to fall with those elite teams? And the fact that we've already seen these preseason contenders suffer a loss, it makes it feel like there is not that invincible juggernaut from the SEC. The only counterpoint I can come up with is this is just kind of the way the sport is now, and the best team is never going to show itself in early October. Maybe the best team last year, Ohio State, wasn't showing itself yet at this point. They had the loss to Oregon, of course, but maybe that is just going to be, hey, we're going to see these teams that are so portal reliant now develop, and by November, we're like, oh, the SEC's got like 2 or 3 teams that can win a title. There could be some of that. Or it could just be more of what we've seen already. It's going to be fascinating.
The other thing is, too, is that, and this is where I can get frustrated, and you probably do as well, can get frustrated with some of the national narratives out there from, I like Joe Klatt at times, but he and others that are really leading the charge with that is just, with the SEC bias and that kind of stuff. And the misconception or the problem that a lot of folks, when they start pointing at, well, though they have that loss or they have that loss, teams take losses.
Yeah.
The idea that every team needs to go 12-0, or whatever, it just doesn't happen. Even historically, that didn't happen a whole lot. That's why the Georgia a couple of years ago that went 15-0 was such an anomaly. Teams do not go undefeated very often. And so in this age of maybe, closer parity, it's not the NFL, but we are having more parity. You're going to see teams take more losses. Ohio State lost twice last season, and they were by far the best team in the country by the end of the year. So, having a couple L's next to your ledger doesn't kill you in terms of your national champion hopes, if I'm playing my, devil's advocate with myself here.
Agreed with you on that. Last one for you. You are a Florida grad. You covered Florida. You obviously have kept in touch with that program and all of its developings. And so I'm going to put you in Scott Strickland's shoes, or at least the AD's shoes. Let's not assume Scott Strickland's got a job in perpetuity, but if you're the AD of Florida, who's that call that you're making to?
I think that Florida will have lots of good candidates interested in this program because Billy has stacked the roster. So if you can convince these 5-star freshman receivers to stick around, some of the defensive line talent, so it's a win now job. And so I think you need a win now coach. And so I think you have to call Curt Cignetti first. Now, some Florida fans will be like, oh, we want Lane Kiffin. We want somewhere here for the long haul. I don't know if Lane would be here for the long haul. But Lane would be on that list. But I think Curt Cignetti has to be, the number one choice. Now, if he says no, which again, in a vacuum would be crazy to tell anyone if they just woke up from a coma, that the coach from Indiana would say no to, whether it's Penn State or Florida. But I think that's a real possibility. I think that, he's already making close to $9 million. He's got a ton of investment in Bloomington. And the expectations, even though what he's doing right now will never be as crazy or, as pressure filled as they would be in Gainesville. So if Curt Cignetti says no, then I think that you're having a kind of an interesting conversation, because do you go to Lane? Lane's been very successful at Ole Miss. But again, the ceiling has kind of been capped on his ability to kind of win some of the bigger games. He could win a huge one on Saturday against Georgia. But can he, is he interested in kind of taking Florida to the next step? I think a Marcus Freeman is a guy that, would certainly be on that list. And one more name to toss out there, I think Eli. I think Drink. Florida wants to score points. There's, lots of folks immediately pointed to James Franklin. Oh, Florida would do awesome. I think Florida could do a lot worse than James Franklin, and you can make the case. I think even say it with a straight face that James Franklin could ultimately be whoever if he goes to North Carolina or Maryland or wherever this offseason, potentially he could end up being the best hire of the 2025 cycle. I'm not making that case, but I think you could write a column and make that argument because of his floor and success. But James Franklin doesn't score points, and so I don't think Florida fans,
unless Joe Moorhead is his offensive coordinator. Yeah,
you're
right.
And Akron could be open, so that he maybe that reunion happens. So I would you got to call Kurt first. I think Kurt Cignetti's got to be the number one guy for any job this cycle. I don't know how you feel as an Indiana grad. I can spin it back to you, but I think he would have to be call A for every job, whether it's Penn State, Florida, whoever. And then if he says no, that's when you go down your list a little.
And the irony for anybody, for any sort of pushback of hiring Kurt Cignetti for an SEC job like Florida would be, well, he doesn't have roots here. He doesn't have the Southeastern roots. He doesn't have experience. But he was placed in Bloomington, Indiana, where football is such an afterthought. And to have the success that he's had there in 2 years, truly rebuilding the culture, not just, he benefited from that schedule. If they were looking at 7-5 this year, like we wouldn't be having these conversations. But I think people saw the physicality that Indiana had on Saturday in Eugene and thought, oh my God, that'll play anywhere. And that to me is the best possible thing you can say about it. And look, I've accepted the fact that even though I want good things to happen for my school, he's going to get pursued. And it'd be crazy if he weren't pursued. It'd be crazy if he wasn't considering these jobs at 64 years old, knowing you might not have that many cracks at a national championship apple. And you can tell yourself, we've spent him $11 million on these assistants. We've gotten this talent in the door. We're spending more on football. But if those jobs are open, you're never going to have to even have those conversations to debate it. So I agree with you 100%. He would probably have to be a first choice for any premier job that opens up.
Yeah. And his age at a school like Florida, that there would be some pushback from some fans because they'd say he's 64. I know what he's doing in Indiana is awesome, but we've been cycling through these coaches, since Urban left. Do we really want to only have a coach here for 4 or 5 years? And to that, I would say, if Kurt Cignetti comes to Florida and wins an SEC championship and has you in the playoff in 4 or 5 years, he's leaving the program a hell of a lot better than he found it, and you'd be just fine and be able to hire the next Kurt Cignetti or whoever is the hot guy if he retires, at 70, whenever. So don't worry about that problem. You would gladly take that issue.
Maybe you could just coach until he's 85 for all.
Yeah, I mean, if you got a septuagenarian, coaching in Chapel Hill still, you can last as long as you want.
Yeah, dude's in his mid-60s, lighting up officials like he's 28. So who knows, man? Jesse, really appreciate the time. Everybody go subscribe. Surrender Cobra. The newsletter is on Substack. It is free. It is great college football content. You break down all of it. Really, really appreciate it. We'll do it again soon, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Connor.